We've been saying it for weeks, and finally Texas makes it official. Rodney Terry is their new head coach, and the Longhorns got it right.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined by host Isaac Schade as well. It's Final Four week. We're going to talk about the Final Four teams. We're going to talk about the coaches in particular. We're also going to give you some transfer portal updates to close out the show. But first, the big story of the day, Rodney Terry got his job. He got his bag, 5 years, $15 million. It is.
Andy, you might say he hooked the bag.
He hooked the bag.
Yes.
Rodney Terry, of course, taking over for Chris Beard in the middle of the season after his arrest for domestic violence and subsequent firing from Texas. We've talked, Isaac, I don't know, basically every episode, 2 or 3 episodes a week at least, with a mention of how Rodney Terry deserves to get this job from the Longhorns, bringing this team all the way to the Elite Eight. Yes, they lost before they got to the Final Four. Yes, they technically lost to a lower seed. You could call it an upset. The definition of an upset is going to match here, but that's a very, very good Miami team. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, but I kind of want to hear your initial reactions as somebody who, you know, has been champion the hire Rodney Terry train for a long time on seeing this deal finally get done for Texas.
Oh, I'm right with you, Andy. You said it off the top. Texas got this right, and I think we can be as succinct as that, but obviously we do want to talk about it longer. You know, I think we've been pushing for it to happen sooner. There were people championing like, hey, how wild would it be to go say it in a press conference before the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight? But I mean, it's pretty clear that AD Del Conte, that's not his first name, athletic director Chris Del Conte, was just wanting to wait till the end of the season, and that's fine. But what's been interesting to me is some reporting has come out from like Matt Norlander at CBS that said it seems like Terry wasn't the play for a while. Texas didn't really have plans to hire him, but where I'm at on it, he has forced their hand. Like if Texas had decided not to hire Rodney Terry, I think they would have had an all-out riot on their hands because of what he's done with this. The report is that they kind of hashed out the contract deals all Sunday night and late into Monday morning after Texas's loss to Miami that you mentioned. And they get it done. 5 years, $15.3 million. I haven't seen all the specific details, but that's kind of the broad picture look at it right now. So about $3 million a year to start out. And I think that's great. For those who don't know, he's a coach with previous head coaching experience, and we'll talk about all that. But Andy, I think here's the big thing for me that we got to keep in mind. You're going to hear people say some version of this. Well, all he did was take over for a team that Chris Beard put together and coached and just kept the train moving, kept their head above water. But I want to push back on that and say he took a team who lost their head coach mid-season because he was arrested, as you said. He kept them together. He didn't let it implode, which easily could have happened. And it wasn't like they just cruised to like a top 4 finish in the Big 12, got like a 4 or 5 seed and did okay in the NCAA tournament. This team won the Big 12 tournament. They were right at the top, right at the top of the Big 12 all season long, the best conference in college basketball. They got a 2 seed in this tournament. They made it all the way to the Elite Eight. They were very, very close to making this Final Four. And so you cannot guarantee me that Chris Beard would have done any of that. Now, he very well may have.
Right.
But Rodney Terry didn't just like roll the ball out there and say, good luck, boys. Coach Beard put you together. Let's figure it out. He coached the heck out of this team, and he loved these boys, and he would do anything for them.
Yeah, you nailed it with that last point, too. He showed such a passion as a coach, as a mentor, as a figure for these young men. And I think that was what this team needed. I don't know how these players all individually responded to the situation that happened with Chris Beard. It's safe to assume that it impacted them emotionally, mentally, spiritually, perhaps, like in a pretty significant way. How could it not?
Right.
You know, whether you have a hard time believing that your coach could do something like that, whether you don't believe the situation at all. Like, obviously there was contrasting stories in the media. Like, it's a really hard situation for these kids to be put through. And Rodney Terry picked up the ship and righted it in a way that I don't think that, just like you said, that labeling it as, well, he kept them afloat. They were good before, they were good afterwards. What does that say about him? Like, it says a lot to me, because I don't think that that's easy to do. Teams fall apart a lot when stuff like this happens. And this Texas team is very experienced. They have a lot of veteran guys. And I think that did help. If this was a team of freshmen and this situation happened, I don't know convincingly that I could tell you that Rodney Terry would have had the same level of success, because that's a much harder job to do. But it doesn't matter, because he did this. And like you said, he then also won the Big 12 tournament. That's really hard to do. He made the Elite Eight. That's really hard to do. And yeah, you can look back at his resume at UTEP. You can look back at his resume at Fresno State. UTEP one is a little questionable. Fresno State, he won 20 plus games 4 out of 6 years at Fresno State. To me, that's pretty good. I don't think that he was at 53% winning percentage at Fresno State. Not great. Only one NCAA tournament in 60 years. But, Fresno State's not a perennial powerhouse program. They're a mid-level Mountain West program. And he won 20 games for, 66% of the seasons that he was there. So I think you look at if you were to look at his blind resume and say, this is a person who's getting a high-level Power 5 job, you would probably question it. I understand that. But there's a lot more to the story. And to me, I think it's pretty clear that Rodney Terry deserves all of the accolades that he has gotten, and every cent of that $15 million coming his way over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and man, like, I even look at his press conference. He was asked after this game where his team had just given up double-digit lead to Miami in the final 12 and a half minutes of the game, and was basically asked about the job, which, like, I get that that's your job as a reporter, but come on, man. Anyway, was asked, like, do you think you deserve this job, or how badly do you want this job? And he, like, won't get into it. He just talks about the kids, talks about the boys, and how they've kept it together and held it together. And you look at that, and, like, because I think we have to ask the question, like, people are going to say this as well. Well, look at how they gave up that 13-point lead to Miami in the Elite Eight. First off, did you hear what round I just said they were in? The Elite Eight. Like, they made it there. That in itself is incredible. They had lost Dylan DeSue. They still knocked off Sahvir without him. And I know that people would say, yeah, but Sahvir didn't have Zach Fremantle. Great, cool. They still had this little Jack Nungy dude who's also massive, right? And so that is a big, big hill to overcome. And they were right with this incredible Miami team for a long time. And you and I have talked about this, and even off air, and said, we believe that loss was less about Texas like choking and more about Miami just putting it together down the stretch. And so that to me is not a massive negative. And I'm really excited to see what the next couple years hold for Rodney Terry and Texas. They've got good things going. No reason for me to think they're going anywhere. Andy, you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I think this Texas team is going to be flying high for a while. I think as long as Terry can recruit, which is something that we'll have to see on paper that he's able to do. But I think he did a good job of displaying how much he loves his players and loves his team. And I think that's going to help him get high-level recruits and transfers for the next few years.
And it's pretty cool. I mean, when you think about, like, he and Jerome Tang, like, these are two guys who it's their first year in the Big 12. And I love that they are just men who don't mind being emotional, who don't mind showing how much they love their teams. Like, it's clearly a different era from, like, the Bobby Knights of the world, where he's like, I love it and I'm here for that. And I'm all about, like, how do we love and honor these young men well? And there's a new and different way to do that than being a drill sergeant. And I think that's awesome. Andy, Rodney Terry, unfortunately, isn't one of the Final Four coaches like it seemed for most of Sunday like he would be. But there are 4 really, really good coaches left in the Final Four. They're still dancing. And here's what we want to do is talk about them and rank the Final Four coaches for you. We will do that in just a minute. But first, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you've got a favorite bar or puff to vote for, and now's your chance to do so. So go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorite. Andy, we talk about it all the time. We love that churro bar, and that's what we'll be voting for. And by the way, when you go and vote, you will be entered into a drawing where 50, count them 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And one lucky Locked On listener will get an entire year's subscription to Built, where you will monthly get bars or puffs of your choice delivered directly to your door. So folks, you got to try these Built bars. They're so amazing. You won't even think it's good for you. But why is it so good? Well, they are high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. Oh my word, I can get behind that. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. Folks, you can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Andy, we've got 4 coaches left. I don't know if you're aware of this. That's typically how the Final Four works.
Sure
There's
is.
4 teams and 4 head coaches. It's this crazy mathematical phenomenon. No, very seriously. This is a fun group of coaches, as we've already talked about. None of them have won a national championship. So one of these 4 men will be a first-time national champion. Only Miami's Jim Larranaga has been here before, but none of them with their current schools. His only Final Four visit was with that George Mason run back in 2006 when I graduated college. So I've got it very locked in to my memory. So just to make sure everyone's up to date, Miami's head coach, Jim Larranaga, FAU's coach, Dusty May, San Diego State's coach, Brian Dutcher, and UConn's coach is Danny Hurley. So Andy, let's just kind of go back and forth on these 4 guys. Just give a little bit of a bio, and then we'll go through ranking where we have them. And if I got a little peek at our rankings, which as we always do, we did them separately, I think they played out pretty similarly there. So already talked about Jim Larranaga, so let me give you some of his career numbers. 697 and 457 overall, a 60.4% winning percentage, specifically at Miami. 255 and 148, 63.3%, 7 regular season championships, 4 conference tournament championships. He's been to 11 NCAA tournaments, 2 of which he's advanced all the way to the Final Four, which, by the way, that George Mason Final Four run has to rank within like the top 10 most shocking Final Four runs ever. That might be a fun off season, Andy. I'm gonna write that down.
You know that.
While we're talking. Most surprising Final Four runs ever. At Miami, been pretty good, although there was like this lull for a while there where they were like 29 and 52 for a while before Larranaga, and they had a little bit of a dip from like 18 to 20 where it just wasn't getting the dudes. But man, they now are back on top. They've had back-to-back Elite 8 appearances, the first 2 Elite 8 appearances in Miami history, and obviously the first Final Four right now. Andy, what about Mr. Dusty May down in Florida, hanging out with the retired folks?
It's hard to compare Larranaga and May, and obviously it's hard to compare all 4 of these coaches. They're all in really different points in their career. You have like a longtime assistant in Dutcher. You have kind of a legacy coach in Danny Hurley. You have a young coach, 5th-year coach in Dusty May, and then Jim Larranaga, who's been doing this for a really long time. It's a really eclectic group of coaches, which I think is what makes it fun and makes it really hard to rank them. With May, he's only in his 5th year. That's it. 5th year. He's won 63% of his games, almost the exact same percentage that Larranaga has won at Miami. Dusty May, 101 and 59 in his career at Florida Atlantic. This is his first NCAA tournament. We talked about this team has never won an NCAA tournament game before. That did not stop Dusty May from leading this team all the way to a Final Four. You look at the progression that this team has gone through in Conference USA at Florida Atlantic. They were 8-10 for their first 2 seasons under May, 7-5, 11-7, and then 18-2. So 9th place, 4th place, 2nd place, 1st place. That is the trajectory you want to be on when you couple that 1st place appearance with, a Final Four appearance as well. Pretty amazing stuff that we've seen from Dusty May in the first half decade of his coaching career.
And those 8 gajillion wins this season.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Let's go to Brian Dutcher at San Diego State. He has the best head coaching winning percentage of this force by a lot. Yeah, the only one over 70%, 150 and 46 overall, 76.5% winning percentage. Interestingly, despite the fact that he's a bit older, this is only his 6th season as a head coach and all of them at San Diego State. He was a long-time assistant under Steve Fisher, both at Michigan, and then came with him to San Diego State when he moved out west. Notably, if that name's familiar to you, he was the architect of the Fab Five and all that there in Ann Arbor. As for what he's done at San Diego State, he's been there. This is, again, his 6th year. 4 of the 5 years that there's been a tournament, boy, that stupid COVID thing really messes up how we talk about all this. But 4 of the 5 years there's been a tournament, they've made it under Brian Dutcher's leadership. But this is the first time they've won a game in the NCAA tournament. He's made it, but never advanced past the first round. And so there is just that kind of, I mean, frankly, on the whole Mountain West Conference, there's that kind of stain. But they have been first in the in the Mountain West Conference, 3 of his 6 seasons, and they've never been worse than 4th in the Mountain West, which is, people are like, Mountain West, come on, what? No, that's a good, strong conference year after year after year. So great stuff by Brian Dutcher. Just one of those guys, we already talked about Jerome Tang, who's been a long time assistant that's really stepping into the limelight, and you love to see it. Andy, what about Dan Hurley up in the New England area?
Danny Hurley, yes, 61% winning record for his career. He spent 2 years at Wagner, spent 6 years at Rhode Island before getting the job with the Huskies. He's in his 5th year there, so it's kind of funny. We talked about the differences between all of these coaches, but Dusty May's in his 5th year with Florida Atlantic. Danny Hurley's in his 5th year with UConn. Dutcher's in his 6th year at San Diego State. So we're seeing some similarities there. I don't have the number in front of me, but Larranaga's in, I think, his 11th or 12th year at Miami. So a little bit different there. But for the most part, these guys have been at their programs for a similar amount of time. Hurley, 65% winning percentage at UConn, which is phenomenal. Again, Dutcher 76%, but there's a difference between the Mountain West and the Big East. I think the Mountain West is one of the best mid-major conferences by a significant amount. But the lack of NCAA tournament success for the conference as a whole does tend to kind of mar the belief that it is a great conference in the regular season as well. And that's understandable. Winning 66% or 76% of your games in a conference that has virtually no NCAA tournament success, it does factor in. I will put it that way. But for Hurley, I mean, this is his first time in the second weekend of the tournament. He has not had a lot of NCAA tournament success up to this point. Holding that against him when Brian Dutcher hasn't had any of that same success either, when Dusty May straight up had never made it before, is maybe a little bit unfair. And certainly the job that Hurley has done through this tournament is remarkable. I mean, you'd expect them to beat Iona, so we won't give him a ton of credit for that. But every other game, St. Mary's should have been a closer game than it was. They beat them pretty handily in the second half. Arkansas is a very good team, and he had to coach a really good game to beat that team, and he made it look
23, by the way.
Yeah, made it look easy to beat a good Arkansas team there. Gonzaga struggled horrifically to shoot, but some of that was Hurley and their coaching and the execution of their game plan and using Adama Sanogo in more of a facilitator role, which I don't think Gonzaga was expecting. And Mark Few's not a guy that gets out coached all that often. And I think it's fair to say that anytime you see a team get beat that badly, it's not just players. So there was some coaching in there as well. So I think Hurley's been doing a really, really good job this tournament. And I think you can look at his overall record and his body of work and his lack of tournament success prior to this and potentially use that as a knock. But the job he's doing right now is as impressive as anybody else in this tournament. And I mean, anybody else in this Final Four. Obviously, anybody who's in a Final Four must have done a good job coaching their team up. But he's been very impressive.
Okay, so then Andy, all that, by the way, Larranaga this is his 12th year at Miami, so you're right there on the precipice of it. Let's rank these guys, and here's what's interesting to me. I kind of alluded to it. We have the exact same order, so let me give it to you, and then let's just banter about it for a minute or two here, Andy. So we both have Jimmy L, Coach L, Jim Larranaga as number 1 ranked, followed by Brian Dutcher, then Danny Hurley, and then Mr. Dusty May. So, Andy, for me, the Larranaga thing, there's a couple things to it. Number 1, I think it's like getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Oscars. Yeah. I mean, I think that has to be part of it is he's just coached so long, but also he's the only one of this group who's in the Final Four for a second time. I know he's had some years of feast and some years of famine, if I can use that Joseph in Egypt reference there. But at the same time, I mean, anyone is going to go through some level of that, especially when you're coaching at the Power 6 level. And that's one of the things like that makes a comparison like any of this hard, because different schools have different histories, different schools have different resources. There's all of that we have to take into account when we're making a list like this. But I just think that he's done it at such a good to really, really strong level for so long. He's already made, this is now his second Final Four. And for me, that all of that, and there's more, but those are some of the highlight reasons to put him number one on the list.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Larranaga's run with George Mason, I think, is with no disrespect to Dusty May and Florida Atlantic at all. But the George Mason run, they were a lower seed. They were an 11 seed. I think it was a more surprising run for him to do that. So he had arguably the best Final Four run that any of these coaches have had historically. And he also took a Miami program that was not in great shape and brought them to back-to-back Elite Eights and a Final Four. To me, like, you almost don't need much more than that. There's a lot more on his resume, but that alone puts him at the top of the list for me. And then I was really, really close between Dutcher and Hurley. Isaac can attest that I changed my mind on the order, and I almost feel like I want to change it again. I'm right 50-50 on those guys. Dutcher, much more success in the regular season than Danny has had, but in a not as difficult conference. I think the job that Dutcher has done this tournament has been fantastic, obviously leading his team to a victory over Alabama, using their physicality, using their experience, putting the right pieces together has been excellent. I think those guys are close. And for May, it's just an experience thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's nothing to discredit him about. There's nothing he has done poorly. He took a team that wasn't very good and steadily improved them to the point where they won more games in college basketball than anybody this year. That's an extraordinary accomplishment. And he's going to be, I mean, look what Larranaga did after getting the George Mason job, or after leading George Mason there. VCU went to a Final Four under a coach named Shaka Smart. Like, both those guys have had tremendously successful careers. I expect the same for Dusty May, whether it's at Florida Atlantic, whether he moves on to a Power 5, Power 6 program and continues to coach there. We will see. That'll be a big topic this offseason, I imagine, but he's an extraordinary coach. All four of these men are fantastic, but I think he's at the bottom right now purely because of that experience level, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's a name that ends up at the top of coaching lists for a very long time.
Right with you.
Well, Isaac, we have started to get some big time players in the portal. It's finally started happening, including a player who ended Coach K's career and then missed the NCAA tournament the final year. We'll talk all about that in the final segment. All right, Isaac, closing out the show, talking portal, transfer portal. It's time. It's not quite the season.
Portaling. We need a theme song for going portaling.
We got 3 more games before the end of the season, and then it's portal, recruiting, portal, coaching carousel, portal, recruit, whatever it is that we end up talking about in the offseason. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation about player movement, as it has become such a staple in the college basketball game. For right now, we're going to talk about 3 big name players who ended up entering the transfer portal. Before we do that, I do want to give a shout out to Tyrese Proctor, who's coming back to Duke. That is a huge return for John Shire's club. The Blue Devils, their season really changed in a significant way when Shire moved him more on the ball and kind of let Jeremy Roach take more of an off-ball role. That was a very intelligent coaching move by Shire, and it paid off for them in a significant way. And now Proctor's coming back, and I think that sets up this Duke team to make a nice run next season. But
yeah, 6'5" guard's not a bad thing to have,
Yeah, it's not at all. But Isaac, I don't want to talk about Duke. I want to talk about North Carolina. I want to talk about the Tar Heels and Caleb Love, a kid from St. Louis who has entered the transfer portal. We know that Mondo Baycott is back. We know that RJ Davis is back. Caleb Love said, you know what? I think I'm out. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to find some different pastures for me and my style of play that I think might fit a little bit better. I want to get your initial thoughts on maybe where that might be, where he could potentially end up, and just kind of your thoughts on what this means for North Carolina.
Yeah, it's a great question, Zanny. Well, folks, if you're not aware, basketball teams get 13 scholarships per season max. Caleb Love has now become the 6th Tar Heel to transfer out following this season. We learned that news on Monday afternoon. It was obviously long speculated about, but now it is a real thing. For those who aren't aware, Caleb Love is a St. Louis kid. Jason Tatum's dad was his coach, and so there's all of those affinities. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of speculation. I'm going to give you 2 places that I'm really looking at right now. One of them is Mizzou, who was one of the schools he looked at out of high school. Obviously, Columbia, Missouri, where Mizzou is just basically halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City on I-70. I'm so bad at interstates, but just right there in between the two. Wouldn't be surprised to see him there. It was a great first year for Dennis Gates, so we'll keep our eyes on that. The other one, Arizona. Here's why. Kirk Creasy, we know, transferred out of Arizona. Steve Robinson was on Roy Williams' staff, was the lead recruiter for Caleb Love to get him to North Carolina. Where is Steve Robinson now? He is on staff with Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, a place where Caleb Love kind of was looking at out of high school as well. So I'm not saying it's going to be one of those 2 schools, but those are 2 that would seem to make a lot of sense to me. Obviously, as an offensive player, he would get a lot of freedom and shots in that Arizona offense. And so it would be really interesting. Obviously, we'll keep you updated in that. And it's so interesting because Caleb Love, as you alluded to, Andy, has one of the biggest shots in North Carolina history, basically sending them to the national championship game over the outstretched fingertips of Mark Williams last year. But he's so streaky. So streaky. I mean, he averaged his field 3-point percentage this year was under 30%, on 7 attempts a game. Like he's not a very efficient shooter. His whole career, like his assist to turnover ratio has been really close to 1. And so he had a much higher 2-point percentage this year, but he's never really been like an efficient shooter. And so you asked about the Carolina side of it. I'm really curious to see what it looks like now to have RJ running the show. Obviously, with Simeon Wilcher coming in and other stuff next year, there's talk of maybe Elliot Cadeau will reclassify and come. But what does RJ Davis look like without looking over his shoulder, right? When he knows it's him. Last year, part of the reason Carolina was so good is he and Armando Bacot running that pick and roll to death, just PNRing everyone all over the place. And now there's a possibility of more of that. It's a great foundation for the Tar Heels, who, again, as I said, have 6 open scholarships. Although we also learned that one of them went to Paxson Wojcik on Monday, who committed to the Tar Heels. So we'll keep our eyes on it, but that's where it's at right now. Andy, let's go to your neck of the woods out west, where Kel'el Ware announced his transfer portal entry from the Oregon Ducks.
Yeah, Kel'el Ware, a guy that many expected to be, before the season started, a lottery pick, or at least an early to mid first round pick. He was a highly touted prospect coming out of Little Rock, Arkansas, which we will get to momentarily what that means. He moved from Arkansas all the way to Eugene to play for Coach Dana Altman, and Dana Altman didn't really play him. And that ended up being why he entered the transfer portal. Now, he didn't play all that well when he was on the floor. He only averaged like 6 points, 4 rebounds per game. He had like 1.5 blocks, didn't shoot it all that well, was kind of touted as a guy who could be a stretch 5, who can shoot threes and also block shots, defend the rim, which are highly, highly touted players. There's a reason Chet Holmgren was like one of the most, unicorn type basketball players you've ever seen, because the ability to do both those things is really sought after. Ware just never got significant playing time at Oregon. By the end of the season or the middle of the season, he was benched pretty much entirely, barely playing at all. His NBA prospects plummeted. And I respect that he came out and said, look, I'm not entering the draft. Right. I'm not doing it. I'm going to go somewhere else. And he said, all love to Oregon. He didn't trash the program or anything, but he said, I'm going to go find somewhere else to play. And then I'm going to continue to pursue my NBA career, which I think was the spot on correct decision for Kel'el Ware. I don't think his performance this year merited significant NBA consideration. I wouldn't have blamed him for at least going through the process, but I think this makes more sense for him. Yeah. And I think the first place you have to consider as an option for him is Arkansas, because it's where he's from. It's a program that relishes using the transfer portal. Eric Musselman, it seems like if you guys follow people on Twitter who report like who's been contacted in the portal, it's just Arkansas all the time. They're on every single list. They've contacted every guy out in the portal, and no judgment there. I understand it's a great way to build a roster, but I have to imagine that Arkansas is going to be heavily involved in trying to bring Ware home. It makes sense for them to get a player of his pedigree, of his kind of skill set that he presents. Also, got to give a shout out to Locked On NBA Big Board host Rafael Barlow, who tweeted that he believes, I think he was more speculating, so I don't want to say he's sourced on this necessarily, but he thinks that Cal Baptist transfer Taron Armstrong, who's one of the best pure point guard prospects in the portal right now, that Armstrong and Ware should team up and try to find a package duo, because he thinks that Ware's skill set alongside Armstrong's distribution ability would make them like a really good 1-2 pairing. So I'm going to mention Arizona again, because you already mentioned Arizona for Caleb Love, which I think there's a very obvious fit there. Taron Armstrong has been connected to Arizona as a replacement for Kerr Kriisa. We didn't mention Kriisa much on this show, but I think there's a decent chance he goes to Xavier. We can talk about that some other time, but his old coach, Sean Miller, it makes some sense. Sule Boom's gone. Anyway, for Ware, a pairing in Arizona only really makes sense if either Umar Ballo or Azuolas Tubelis don't come back, specifically Ballo. If Ballo's still there, I'm not sure I see a Ballo-Ware front court really working, but it's definitely one to consider. And then finally, going to toss out Gonzaga. They're obviously losing Drew Timme. He has made it very clear he does not intend to return for his 5th and final year of eligibility. That is a gaping hole in the front court for the Zags. One of their biggest issues last year as a team, unquestionably, was rim protection. Kel'el Ware, he brings that. He can stretch the floor a little bit. He'd be more of a developmental piece. I don't think they would bring him in to start and play 32 minutes a game. I don't know that he's ready to do that. But if Anton Watson returns, starts at the 5, Kel'el Ware comes in as a backup to him, I think it could make some sense.
It sure could. Andy, interesting what you said about Ware not even testing the NBA waters. I felt the same about Caleb Love. Like, man, what a cliff his NBA prospects have fallen off of. And finally, we'll just hit this quickly, is Sahvir Wheeler from Kentucky, who, was the starting point guard to start the year, eventually got beat out by Cason Wallace. Lots of ink was spilled about how much better Kentucky was with Cason Wallace at the point. Wheeler has 1 year of eligibility left. He played 2 years at Georgia, 2 years at Kentucky. Basically, he needs to find a place to play with a bigger guard who can shoot, because Wheeler is not a great shooter and is only 5'10". So he needs a big guard to play alongside who can shoot, but he is a great and dogged defender. And so that is somebody that if you're looking for, had some injury issues that year, that cut into it as well. I'll just give one potential landing place. He's from Houston. Houston loves to defend. Why not go play for Kelvin Sampson? We'll see. Who knows? But it just kind of has some obvious fit to it there. But obviously, we're going to talk more about all these guys and more names as they come into the transfer portal, as Andy said. All right, folks, it is Tuesday. We've got just 4 days until Final Four Saturday. Can't wait. We're going to be locked in right here with you, locked in and locked on, I should say, every day with great stuff coming at you as we get ready for these games. Please make sure, if you've not already done so, to subscribe to the show on YouTube, smash the like button, comment on the show and your speculative landing spots for these transfers. We appreciate you so much tuning in with us. As always, my apologies to the Lawyer family, and until tomorrow, peace.